Welcome to another episode of the Shakedown. With me, as always, I have my esteemed co-host, my right honourable colleague. I've been talking a lot about you this week, Baxty, and the amount of knowledge, your knowledge delta that you've got over me. How are you keeping, sir?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, mate. Got a big opera contract coming up in the next few days. Starting off, so kind
Let's
of packing
go.
away.
Let's go. I am loving that, bruv. Onwards and upwards. And you're coming down to the Big Smoke, I hear, or up to the Big Smoke, depending on who you talk to. Apparently, you always go up to the capital.
I'm headed that way, headed back that way because I grew up there. So
Let's
yeah.
go. Loving your work, sir. Right, let's get into some F1 chat. The news cycle has been a bit weird this week. It's bubbled and it's kind of not bubbled. The biggest news story in the news cycle, for my money, was all the big talk about Pitstop Podcast. The lads, Flavio and Jake, and the stuff that they've been saying. So Jake Boys and Flavio, for context, have been running a podcast for the last 12 months and have done really well with it, right? They were the number one podcast up until recently, after Sky Sports released their own native podcast and trumped them. But their angle has been one of learning, right? They're learning F1 and they don't know all the facts and stats and the minutiae, and nor do they proclaim to, which has kind of been their unique selling point with the advent of Drive to Survive and lots of new fans, etc., etc. However, what has happened over the last week or so is that they've gone onto a podcast hosted by an F2 driver come IndyCar driver, a fella called Marcus Armstrong, with another F2 driver called J.M. Correa, with another F2 driver called Clementine Novak. And they were saying some fairly rogue stuff, weren't they? Baxty, chime in on this, bro. What was your initial reaction when you saw or heard about the podcast and what they'd said?
Yeah, I thought the whole thing was just a bit weird, really. I think, yeah, look, people are entitled to their opinions, and freedom of speech is something I believe in passionately, but when you say stupid stuff, you're going to get called out for it. And I think sitting in a room of racing drivers saying nobody cares about racing, that's essentially saying we don't care about your job.
Chaos.
It's like somebody saying to me as an opera singer coming, oh, I really like coming to the theatre, but I don't like opera. Well, why come? Why come? And what's the point of doing a podcast about F1 when nobody cares about the racing? I mean, look, I get these guys are new to it, and I don't know how long they've been going. I think maybe a year or so. And I think, how many banger races have we had in that time? We've had a couple of decent ones, but we haven't had like some of the all-timers like Canada 2011 and stuff like that. So and you need races like that to really draw people in. Like, somebody could switch on a race like that for the first time and go, oh my God, what is this? This is the greatest thing ever. Or they could tune into Bahrain 23 and just go, oh, that was boring. And I think, just talking like that, particularly with the following that you've got as well, it's not very sensible. It's not sensible. Like, I get people make mistakes, but you got to remember these guys have had access to people in F1 that, content creators like yourself and me and we would love to have access to the guys like Buxton and Kraft and all of those guys, and even I think they had Leclerc on, didn't they?
Yeah, they went out to Leclerc courtesy of Shell, I think.
Yeah, like I'd love to be able to sit down with an F1 driver and just pick his brain for an hour or so, and they've been able to get that. And yeah, I feel like they let themselves down with comments like that. And that's the pitfalls of being in any sort of front-facing industry where you are on show, and occasionally you do make mistakes. You do put your foot in it and say something stupid. But I think there's being ignorant like they are about the sport and using that to their advantage. But there's a fine line between advantageous and stupidity, and they cross that line into the stupidity, definitely.
I'd agree with you, Baxty. It was daft of them to say that, and almost willfully ignorant, right? That they're kind of okay. It's one thing to leverage your ignorance in a Drive to Survive era F1, with a view to attract more listeners and watchers and subscribers and better ratings on your podcast. That's one thing, right? But but to do it when face to face with drivers, it just felt like it felt awfully insensitive, much less disrespectful of their audience, but more disrespectful of the people they were talking to, right? Like Clem and Marcus, like they're there in front of you. JM Correa, you said that you didn't even know who he was, and that's it's a bit. You know what though, Baxter, I will confess, and here's where like I play both sides, right? Like I'm not a massive F2 fan. I will be honest with you. Like I don't have that much time in my weekend to sit down and watch all of F2 and then all of F1. Right? That's a full time. That's like 8 hours worth of a weekend there. So JM Correa, like as soon as I heard the controversy and the madness, like I had to go and retroactive. Okay, so he was involved in the Antoine Hubert incident and all, and struggled to make it back. So that was a research piece. Marcus Armstrong I've come across before, but again, if he'd passed me in the street, Baxty, I wouldn't know. I might miss him even today.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
And similar thing with Clem. So what I don't want to do, hence why I've been name checking you and Shez so often over the past 5 to 7 days. What I don't want to do, which is what I think the space is doing more broadly, is looking down its nose at these like 20-something-year-old Flavio and Jake and judging them for their lack of knowledge, right? And doing this God tier level gatekeeping thing that for me fuels the toxicity of the space, the origin story of toxicity, whichever way you want to point it at, is for me gatekeeping, a sense that this is my sport, this is our sport, and I don't want to let anybody else in, right? So I just I agree with everything that you said, Baxty, but I don't know, it upsets me when there are grown people, like middle-aged people on Twitter talking about these boys in a way that's like I don't know, just super gatekeeping, dismissing, and I feel like we should be better than that as a community, irrespective of everything that you've already said, Baxi, and you're completely on the nose with it. My focus is on not kind of destroying these boys' lives, like it feels a bit harsh.
Yeah, it's a bit cancel culture, isn't it? It's look, they made a mistake, and I think people make mistakes, and it's about how they respond from those mistakes. I mean, this is what we say about F1 drivers all the time, but that's we do that in our life as well every day. Like, we make mistakes. How can you come back from it? I mean, for example, the first thing is you don't turn to a driver and say, "I've never heard of you." You can think it,
blag it, mate. That's exactly.
You don't say it to them. That's just so idiotic. And if you'd done 5 minutes of research, you would have realised who this guy was and what he's been through and everything else. I think in terms of the reaction that then followed, I get that there was call outs and people basically criticising them, and rightfully so. I felt the review, when they went to the review bombing and basically just slamming their review score on Spotify, I thought that was harsh. I think, first of all, it wasn't even on their own podcast. It was somebody else's podcast that they made this mistake on. So their podcast is being, and the people that work behind the scenes on that podcast is being punished. But also at the same time, I feel like, and this goes into what you were saying about gatekeeping, is because I feel there's a lot of pearl clutching involved, that these guys who have come into the game, fresh meat, as it were, and getting all these opportunities and everything else. I think there was a lot of jealousy as well coming in, that these guys have kind of swanned in and dominated from the off, and others have had to work hard to get to where they are, and they're maybe feeling just a little bit of jealousy there. Look, it happens. I mean, I work in a cutthroat industry where people get jealous all the time, and I've been guilty of it myself. And you just got to recognize it when you see it and go, yeah, this is some of this. I think is just a jealousy and people wanting to criticize them because they're not fans of them anyway. So they're just sort of diving on the pile in.
Yeah, mate, you've said it more succinctly and better than I ever could put it. I think, to your jealousy point, Baxty, I would put myself in that pot. If I'm being brutally honest, I don't like the fact that They're brand new to the space. Moreover, they don't know a lot. They lean into the unknowing, and yet they're still getting Buxton on. They've got this brilliant relationship with Crofty. They're in bed with the Ferrari title sponsors, which enables them to go out and have face-to-face with the Ferrari guys. It's like, how is this fair? And I get that enables the massive PhD level, God tier level gatekeeping, but I just think it feels a little bit wrong. I disagree with you ever so slightly, Baxty. I know what you're saying about the rating the podcast being harsh, but you kind of that's the Northern Rock, right? That's the run on the bank. These are people that are saying, listen, I want to voice my opinion. I'm gonna, and the only way that I can do it is to downrate these guys. And I think they've been given a couple of chances, to be fair, by the community. This isn't the first one, right? There've been a couple. The Vettel won a case, that was very knowledge based, but they didn't know that Vettel had won 4 championships with Red Bull between 2010 and 13.
That's storm in a teacup stuff. Like, it's their whole shtick, isn't it? I that doesn't bother me.
I don't think that bothers me much. That was a bit of a much to do about nothing. That, but then there was another one, wasn't there? That was like I can't remember the other one. My memory bank fails me, but this was the big one that was like, and then there was a bit of misogyny in there. But again, as I watched it back, chatting at birds, is that misogynistic now? Baxty? Was that the misogyny that people are referring to?
I mean, look, I don't particularly wish to comment too much on what's gatekeep misogyny. I don't think I'm qualified enough to do that. But
me neither.
I feel like if you're basically just saying, women are there to be chatted up, that possibly could be considered misogynistic. I don't know. What I will say on this though is that I feel like they've kind of found a niche in the market for this kind of, and bringing new people with them, which I think is great, because look at the way F1 is growing, and with on the business side, you can only do that with fans. And I think what Pitstop have been able to do is, I don't listen to them. They're not my style, but that's fine. You can have different genres of F1 podcasts just as much as you can have different genres of podcasts generally. And I think them having that safe space for newcomers to come in and enable them to learn with them as they grow is fine. But what they need to be aware of is the responsibility that comes with this enhanced profile.
Oof. Let's get deep, Baxty. I loved that. I'd counter to it though, Baxty. This is the conversation we were having about journalistic integrity a couple of weeks back, right? That not everybody in the Spanners, having this chat with Spanners of the Missed Apex, friend of the channel. Spanners disagreed with me that I try to hold myself to this higher journalistic level of accountability. If I'm going to report a piece of news, make sure that I fact check it with 2 sources, as an example. But again, that's me kind of going above and beyond. I am just a measly podcaster come YouTube channel, and I'm not part of any professional body that holds me to those standards or even that level of accountability. Right? Standard was like, we're not journalists. We operate in this like middle ground between YouTube, full-blown, full-time YouTuber and journalist, but we're not proper journalists. I say all that to say, I'm not sure that those guys, I don't think they owe it to anybody to almost upskill and learn more about F1, because that's almost, that would almost be sabotaging, pulling the rug out from their own USP, right? If they go and learn like, I don't know, all the F1 drivers since the 1950s, it's like, what's gone on with Flavio and what's gone on with Jake? Who are these people? And I think that disenfranchise a lot of their fan base. I would say, I want to put, finally on this, Baxty, I want to pitch this one at you. I think it was Flavio that said something. This is one of the sound bites that got blown up massively, as we've already mentioned. Nobody gives a fudge about your racing, was the quote, something to that effect. His broader point, though, Baxty, and you've just kind of like elucidated on it. The broader point is that the most interesting, juiciest elements of all F1 for mainstream, for the like Drive to Survive generation, aren't necessarily Schumacher and Hill, 1990. Like, do you know what I mean? The things that will perk my ears up, they might not necessarily be interested. And if he'd outlined it in that way, I would have had to agree with him. Baxty, is he onto something there, especially in 2023, when Max Verstappen, barring accidents, is going to nail it? That F1 need to be aware of the demographic of their new fan base, TikTok generation, shorter attention spans, and leverage this and do like more reality TV stuff. I'm not saying another Drive to Survive, but kind of like leverage the story of the drivers, their biggest assets, more than they're doing at the moment to keep this new demographic entertained and interested.
Yes and no. I mean, one of the things they said was that people only care about the drivers and, aren't necessarily bothered if they don't win, which I, again, don't agree with. I mean, it depends on the driver you support, of course. I mean, if you're a Lewis Hamilton fan like us, we want to see him at the front of the grid, winning races, winning championships. Whereas if you're an Alex Albon fan, a Yuki Tsunoda fan, you're going to take points, because that's where they are. So he's kind of right there, but at the same time, if you want to see your driver get as far forward as possible, you're still going to be disappointed if they don't maximize their potential in the car that they have. But yeah, absolutely. Yes, you should leverage the drivers you have, but obviously F1 don't decide who drives the cars, it's the teams. And biggest case in point, Daniel Ricciardo. I love Daniel Ricciardo. He's one of my favorite drivers of all time, but he was put in a position where he had to leave because he wasn't delivering at McLaren. He wasn't prepared to take a step down, as it were, to go to a Haas, to go to a Williams. And now he's stuck at Red Bull as a third driver. And yet he's still one of the most marketable drivers on the grid, but his brand is being hurt because he's not driving the car race in, race out now. And therefore, I think what F1 need to do is they need to look after the drivers they have, but also I feel actually really promote F2 and F3, because then they can go, hey, look, here's the next, like, for example, a Théo Pourchaire. Here's the next superstar. Let's learn about him as well. They do a decent job of promoting those lower categories, but I'm like you. I don't watch them that much because it takes up a hell of a lot of time, and I only really have time to tune into a bit of build up and the Grand Prix. And it's you can't just keep the same 20 drivers every year. Everything changes all the time. So let's have bigger profiles of these newer drivers coming through as well and learn their storylines as well.
Absolutely, bruv. You've nailed it. But I do think F1 now finds itself in a very interesting space on the back of like this massive exponential growth in the viewership and new numbers, a very different mix and yield in terms of the age and the demographic of people that are watching. I think there are a couple interesting storylines that we can extrapolate and expect to see over the next couple of years. I was speaking to somebody quite close to the business earlier this week, and he reckons, he or she thinks that potentially Stefano Domenicali and Liberty Media may be looking to sell at some point over the next couple of years. F1 word in the curb. To that, Baxter, you react how, sir? Massive conjecture and speculation, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I don't think Liberty would want to sell right now. It's a massive cash cow. They're earning money. I think, if, for example, I mean, I know there was rumours that the Saudi investment fund were going to buy, and, for whatever Mohammed Ben Sulayem put it as, but, maybe if they feel they can turn a profit on it, then fine. But right now, I don't see the need to. They're in it. I think they need to reassess the way in which they grow the sport. More races doesn't necessarily mean better. Street circuits certainly doesn't mean better, because they just seem to be pushing for street circuits all the time. Whereas for all of his faults and for all the criticism that I've given Bernie Ecclestone, one of the great things he had was to have Herman Tilke on speed dial and say, design me a circuit, and we're going to go to a country and we're going to build a circuit and build racing infrastructure. Which I think that's something Liberty and Domenicali could certainly do. Like, let's go to somewhere in go to South Africa or something. You've already got Kyle Army, but let's build you a new track. Let's build you a Herman Tilke or whoever track, and do that as well, and use that as a way to promote, because you're not just investing in an area, you're investing in their economy as well and giving people jobs and everything else. Not to get too political here, but that's the thing. So I don't feel the need for, if I was Liberty, I don't feel the need to sell just now unless an offer of like 20 billion comes in from Saudi Arabia or another place. That's just too good to turn down. But right now, I don't see the need to.
I think that's what they might be looking at, Baxty. Like, check my maths on this. But I reckon in the next 24 to 36 months, there's going to be a faction of sovereign wealth fund somewhere who's going to give Liberty Media a check and say, listen, just write your number on here. And I reckon Liberty Media, in the current hyperinflationary environment, cost of living going crazy, markets depressed massively globally, I think Liberty Media may find that too good of an opportunity to turn down, especially given the fact that we might be entering into a period of stagnation if, as most people are saying, Max Verstappen could be heading into potentially the next two championships just as Gimmy's right, with the only competition, the sole Latino contingent on the grid being Checo Perez. It's a weird time. I tell you what as well, anecdotally, you yourself as a content creator, to be fair, you're quite new in the game, right? So you won't have seen the crazy numbers that everybody was doing in 2021. 2021, you could put out a video talking about Max Lewis instantly with 0 subscribers. You'd be looking to do like 5 to 10,000 views. Now, because of the number of eyes that are no longer on the sport, the amount of people that are dialing in, nobody's searching. What's the hot F1 topic for like non-diehards? If you're not a scribbled F1 scribe, then who's checking for F1 at the moment? What's the story? Okay, so you got George and Lewis, and that will come to the brim at some point. Got the number of Ferrari faux pas. Where's Leclerc going to go to? But there's no... It's friction and antagonism at the front that will bring eyes onto F1 and F1 YouTube. And we're lacking that backstage. It's a bloody shame, mate. So I say all that to say, I don't know whether Liberty Media won't be looking consciously at their options right now. It's an interesting time, mate.
Yeah, I mean, this leads into the whole topic of have the new regulations work, because I feel that's something that's been bubbling under the surface, particularly in the Lewis Hamilton fan base for the last few months. And my response to that is simple: is that, look, every time you have a major regulation change, somebody's going to nail it out the gate. I mean, you look at 2014, it was Mercedes. You look at 2009, it was Brawn, and then latterly Red Bull. McLaren and Ferrari 98, 99, and then I can't remember when before them, but you could argue maybe McLaren or Williams or whoever. Like these guys were nailing concepts, and they have a period of domination. And it's really up to the FIA and Formula One to go, look, as great as we feel it is to have Max Verstappen as our champion, we need competition. And the sponsors are going to start talking to them going, look, we invested in this sport because of 2021, but now Max is dominating. What's going on? Why should we continue to invest in the product? And I saw a quote from MBS saying, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, for those that don't know his acronym, that he said, "Oh well, we're not just in the business of competition; we're in the business of entertainment." And my response to that is simple: competition breeds entertainment. Like, yes, okay, 2014, Mercedes dominated, but we had 3 years of an epic personal mano-a-mano battle between Lewis and Nico. And then you had 2 very good championships between Seb and Lewis straight after that as well. So I feel it will get to the point where Red Bull will be pegged back by various regulation. I don't know what it is right now. Maybe they will neutralize the effect of their triple DRS. I don't know. I'm not a technical mind. I don't know what they can do. But it's, Ross Brawn and Pat Simmons have said that they will peg people back. Now you've got to start doing it because Red Bull are too far ahead. So you've got to do this.
And as it's really I agree with you 100%, Baxy, but it feels very Feels very counterintuitive as a person that considers himself part-time purist, part-time DTS fan. That already 3 races deep into the 23 season, I'm desperately calling for Red Bull to be artificially pegged back. So what do we do? That's bonkers, Baxty.
I do feel there's a bit of hangover from last season as well when you have
agreed.
one guy win 15 races.
Yeah.
So that we kind of seen it, and it's like, oh, okay, well, Red Bull were quicker last year. Let's hope Ferrari and Mercedes challenge, and then both of them have somehow fumbled it in some way, and then you go, oh, okay, well, maybe we need to peg Red Bull back then, because that may be the only option. I mean, they did it to Mercedes for years, and they did it. Yeah, they did it to Red Bull a little bit as well. I mean, there was the big changes between 2011 and 2012. So, it's...
and that's their responsibility, isn't it, Baxley, as a regulator, a regulatory body. It is absolutely the FI's responsibility to tinker where required, especially if they can see a dearth of brand new fans not tuning in anymore. And you know what, Baxley, to the point that you made originally. In fact, let me make this final one, and then I'll circle back round to the competition. I think we're already seeing it, Baxley, with the Red Bull stuff, because I think one of Red Bull's most overlooked strengths, and again, my guy Peter Wins, a friend of the channel, always talks about this, their ability to plan and set up the car. Their ability to leverage the 3 free practice sessions to set up a car for a race is unmatched. Absolutely unmatched amongst the other 9 teams. They didn't even come close. I think that, okay, so they do have a rocket ship, triple DRS or whatever you want to call it, and clearly their Venturi tunnels aren't sloppy either. Aerodynamic efficiency for days. But I think where they really, really excel is their ability to use that free practice time to prepare properly and set their car up for a race over a race distance. These guys are already talking about binning one of the free practice sessions. Make no bones about it, Baxty. That is the first arrow being pointed at that Red Bull Delta. I 100% believe in that.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Absolutely aimed at Red Bull, because nobody has that ability to set up their car the way that Red Bull do, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at Brazil last year, they only had one practice session and they fumbled the bag. I mean,
there you go.
I mean, okay, in the other 2 sprint weekends, they got it right because Max won both of them. Well, apart from Austria, he didn't win the Grand Prix, he won the sprint.
No, Silverstone. I'm doing 2021, so.
Yeah, so it was Imola, if I remember correctly, it was Imola, Austria, and Brazil. And Imola, he didn't quite get it. Well, Imola, they nailed it. Austria, he won the sprint, but they were compromised in the race, which is why Leclerc ended up winning it. And then, obviously, Brazil, they got it wrong. So, yeah, absolutely, I agree. People make mistakes. It happens. And, when you've only got one session to get it right, mistakes can happen.
There you go, mate. And if your strength is using that time to set up your car, because I always, I've heard Peter say this a number of times. And so I've started to look about, pay more attention to the way these guys utilize the free practice time. And versus Red Bull, if you're looking at race simulations, they will always, via either Max or Checo, they will always get race simulations in over the course of free practice, where it looks like all the other teams, or most of the other teams at least, like your Ferraris in particular, all they're focused in and honing in on in most of free practice is soft compound tyres and nailing pole. They never seem to do any race simulations, hence why they always seem to be surprised by this excessive tyre deg that seems to be a terminal issue with their bloody... It's daft, Baxty. It is bonkers. So I think definitely that's proof positive, in my humble opinion, that's the first level of artifice, entertainment more than sports from the FIA. And to the competitive point, Baxty, I don't know. I think you give with one hand and take with the other, because the rest have Constantinaed up, right? They have they have closed the gap. The field as a field is much closer. You've just got one team who've absolutely nailed it. Like you said, that's a historic precedent. That's always happened. One or two teams will always go ahead and nail these new regs. And apparently those two teams are Red Bull and Aston Martin as of this year. Bloody no, I can't believe I've said that.
I know.
That even sounds weird. Baxty, it even sounds weird. Right, mate, as we round third base with T-minus 11 minutes on the clock, can we talk about a couple of things that I want to know? Go on, let's talk about Mercedes' favourite subject. Toto Wolff has said that he's come out with it. He's towing the party line again, isn't he? Clearly, somebody's had a word with him, and no longer is he going rogue. He said that they're going to remain stoic and they're not going to get ahead of themselves. This is a long-term process, but expect to see some material upside in terms of W14's pace over the next couple of Grand Prix. Baxty, as I read that made me happy that no longer a Mercedes burning from within and that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet now. Tick. Perfectly happy. Baxty, the thing that concerns me still is that with my common sense cap firmly on, I'm not sure I want to see these guys. I suppose they have to continue to update this year's car because the rules and regs aren't changing for next year, right? So that makes sense. However, I'm hoping deep down inside that they are putting their resource eggs in the basket of 2024 more than trying to save face and continue to develop this SH1T box of a W13 remix. Am I barking at the wrong tree, Baxty?
No, I agree. I think I think it's fairly obvious that Mercedes aren't going to win any championships this year. They might nick a race. I mean, we saw that when the conditions are right for them, they could be more competitive. Certainly, I mean, at one point I did get my hopes up that Lewis might win in Australia. But I feel that I think what they should do is do what Aston Martin did last year. Stick a new concept on the car, be it Red Bull tracing paper concept or whatever. Get these upgrades in, and then because we're in a cost cap era, so they can't develop these concepts as much as they would like to. Before Mercedes could drop a casual 500 million a season, outspend everyone, and go off and win a potentially go off and win a championship. I think only Ferrari had a bigger budget than Mercedes, certainly towards the end of the non-cost cap era. Whereas I think if they start learning the concept on this year's car and try and maximize that performance for 2024, we know that the penalty that Red Bull have got is more likely to hit their 2024 car than it is this year's car, because the 2023 car was pretty much ready to go by the time that penalty was applied. So it's going to restrict their ability to test and get new concepts on their car. I think 2024 is realistically the best option for Mercedes right now. Obviously, try and get your setup absolutely perfect. I think that's something that they're doing a lot better this year, is that they are definitely maximizing their setup. I think Lewis in Saudi was kind of the exception to this because he admitted he got it wrong and wished he'd gone with George's setup. But yeah, I think there's definitely cause for optimism. I mean, I was slightly concerned when I found out that James Allison hasn't been brought back,
mate,
because that rumor was doing the rounds, and it turns out he's not, and I still feel that he needs to be. I mean, he could be involved, of course. I mean, I think a mind like that is always going to be sort of flirting around the edges, kind of going, "Are you sure that's a good idea?" But I think somebody with his experience, his proven track record. I mean, let's not forget this guy designed a winning Ferrari car. Back in 2015. Let's not remember how hard that is to do. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I do feel like Australia was a bit of a red herring for Mercedes, like Brazil was.
I was just about to say.
But I do feel optimistic that I think we could see Mercedes take it to Aston Martin, because I think they're clear of Ferrari, which I thought after testing would have been a miracle.
I too thought that. I think, the joke is, Baxty, I hear you. I still think Ferrari, on balance, over the course of 23 races, probably have the superior package. I think Australia, we've seen a few anomalies. Like, do you know what I mean? Bahrain is a bit of a weird one of the way that it's set up. There's not too many tracks that mirror that as far as its technical challenges. I think Australia was a bit rogue and the tyre stuff was a bit chaotic. I think we'll see a bit of a reversion to mean, and I think Ferrari still have, so long as they can stop making mistakes and sort out their reliability, which again is a humongous if at this stage. I think Ferrari still have the better package, but here's hoping, man. I'd love to see. I don't even want to jinx it, Baxty. Here's hoping that we could see something decent out of Mercedes, mate. Finally, bruv. We talked to this sprint qualifying stuff because this is kind of doing the rounds. I don't even know what to make about this, Baxty. So for viewers and listeners, and by the way, if you're listening on a podcasting platform, do me a favour and scroll to the top, especially if you're on Spotify or iTunes. Drop us a 5-star review, por favor. Much appreciated. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, like. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, get over to Baxty BF1 and give him a like and subscribe, because SH1T hot content coming out there every week or so. Sprint qualifying, mate. So the rumour is that at Baku, the next Grand Prix, potentially they're gonna segment, basically split qualifying for the sprint race. Sorry. Mate, this is so bloody confusing. Good luck articulating this, Cameron. Segment the qualifying for the sprint quali from the qualifying for the race. So on Friday, they're going to have a free practice session and qualifying for the race, which is on Sunday. And then Saturday morning will be sprint race qualifying in the morning. And then you'll have the sprint race, which is kind of an entity in and of itself. Baxty, how to that, sir, you react how?
If it ain't broke, why fix it? I mean, I know there's issues with sprint in concept, but I think doing the qualifying on the Friday, that sets that's the pole, and that's pole position as well. And then you do the race on the Sunday. Yeah, the sprint race on Saturday, on Sunday. I thought that worked fine. I didn't see the need to change that. I mean, getting 2 qualifying sessions, okay, that's not bad. Yeah, I don't hate that at all. But actually, I feel that I'm about to do something very controversial. I'm about to talk about another motorsport series here, which I don't watch this series a lot. I know quite a few people I engage with on social media do. Is MotoGP. They've just introduced sprints this year, and they're doing it at every race. They've gone 2-footed in on this concept, and they do the qualifying on the Friday, and that is the grid for both Saturday and Sunday.
Oh, that's easier. So in
the first race, Marquez took pole, only finished 3rd or 4th in the sprint, but started the Sunday Grand Prix on pole as well.
Well, that makes sense. I don't even hate that, Baxty. That just makes more. It's just easier.
I mean, obviously, if you do that, it then takes away things like a potential another Lewis Hamilton 20th to 5th, or it will stop a faster car from recovering. So you kind of got that fine edge there. You could have this epic drive, but then it would be for nothing because they're still back at the grid for the main race on Sunday. But another concept that they could look at if they want to do this sprint thing, and I think they can't do this because I think the teams are just telling them zero chance, is how many of these guys came through F2 where when they do their sprint race, they just do top 10, get reversed. So if you get 10th in qualifying, you start the sprint on pole. And I feel like that's probably the way they want to do it because that's what the drivers are used to and they've all experienced it. But the teams are going, I don't think so, pal.
No chance, mate.
We ain't doing any of that reverse grid nonsense. No. And I'm like, what?
They're not having it, are they, Baxty?
No. Whereas you've got the system that works, and you're like, okay, yeah, this we could do something here, but you got the 10 teams kind of just not wanting to know because Kevin Magnussen got pole in Brazil. If they'd gone with that system, he would have started 10th, and he would have been like, well, what's the point?
Oh yeah, agreed. That's techie.
Yeah, jeez. But then he would have started the Sunday Grand Prix on pole anyway. So yeah.
It's so techie, Baxty. They've got to juggle a couple balls here, right? Because I've for the longest time, I've complained about the rules, Sporting Code of Conduct, and the regs being just far too difficult to understand and lacking in transparency, right? The rules need to be. Offside rule is perfect, right? Although it's a little bit complicated trying to explain it to a layman. Once you get down to it brass tacks, it's either offside or onside, done. Or it should be, I suppose, in today's VAR world, it's a bit more techy than that. And I think the FIA need to be doing something similar. Make these rules easy to understand for all, surely, because you've got a lot of new fans coming in again who don't really care. They're not going to comb through Chapter 4, Article C of the Sporting Code. They don't care about that. They need to watch it and it needs to be easily understandable. That's why when you said about the MotoGP system, like my eyes lit up. I didn't know that. It kind of makes sense in that sense. I will commend the FIA for this, however, Baxty. I think the sprint format, I think it's a great idea. I think the theory is brilliant, but the practice as of April 2023, there's something missing, Baxty. It just doesn't quite, it almost becomes like a procession every single time, right? Like everybody's just playing risk averse and there's points to be had, but they're not that many. So let me just chill out and keep my nose clean. And it's just become a bit, I feel like sprint weekend should have been like sprint weekend, but it's now like, oh my gosh, sprint weekend again. This is
becoming a drag, isn't it?
Mate, it's a disruption in my race weekend. I want to see quali and then a bit of free practice potentially if I've got time, and then want to see the race. Like the race weekend crescendos, right? And people, like fans on the whole, see sprint weekend as an inconvenient like extra. Well, we don't need it. Just keep it as it is. I think it's good, and I commend the FIA for having a tinker. You got to try something, eh? I don't think we'll get to the optimal format for probably another 2-3 years, but they've got to, in order to get there, Baxty, I think they need to kiss a few frogs, right? I think.
Let me put this one to you. I agree with you that they're trying something new, and they haven't quite got it right yet. But maybe if you want to do this dual qualifying thing, then make a show out of it. So on the Friday, you have free practice, and that's the one free practice session you get. You don't get any more. You set your car up in that session, then you go to Parc Fermé once you start the traditional qualifying session, and that sets the grid for the Grand Prix. If you want to do a separate qualifying for the sprint race, let's just throw the chaos door wide open and just take the Formula E style knockout qualifying. Oof. So you get your 2 sessions, then you get your 8 drivers. Who wouldn't want to see? Okay, I know it'd be a bit one-sided at the moment, but who wouldn't want to see a final showdown between Max and Lewis going at it over a lap, or Fernando, or George, or Charles?
Chaos.
Who wouldn't want to see that? You want to see Lewis just in front, setting a time, and then Max behind him, and you can track the temps and see them side by side.
Time trial format. I wouldn't hate it.
Proper time trial,
yeah.
If you want to do it, just okay. You'll be accused of copying them. That's absolutely fine. As I said, you've got 20 of the best drivers in the world. I mean, I would get excitement out of watching Yuki Tsunoda go up against Nick De Vries for 20th,
mate,
or 18th, whatever.
Proper spectacle, mate. I would enjoy that a lot.
FIA, you can have that one for free.
Let's go back to I love it. I love it, but these are the things that they've got to kiss a few frogs, Baxty, to get to the ultimate form of whatever sprint race weekend needs to look like, I think. And I commend them for tinkering and trying, although, again, I feel like they might have kissed another frog in this latest iteration of the sprint weekend format. But you know what? I digress. I wanted to there was something else I was going to get to, but I've forgotten now. A very weak, uncharacteristically weak news cycle week, eh? It's
there's been a few little tidbits. I mean, I read something today that apparently Audi are eyeing up Carlos Sainz.
Heard that.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
Which doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, that connection with Daddy Sainz.
And Seidel as well, from the McLaren days.
That would make sense. Go on then, quickly. You've raised something very interesting there. By extension, so they're looking at 2026 for Sainz. Loaded question. Will Lewis Hamilton be around in 2026? And you know why I asked that, right? You know why I asked that? Because there's an article written today. In fact, it was Eddie Jordan, right, getting on his soapbox saying that Lewis could do with a dream partnership with a Monegasque fella called Charles Leclerc.
That'd be tasty, wouldn't it? That would be tasty.
Eddie Jordan. Yeah.
Where is Eddie saying it would happen, though? Would it happen at Mercedes or Ferrari?
Oh, shoot. You know what, mate? I didn't even look into it that deep. Then now Mercedes aren't getting rid of George Russell anytime soon.
No. I mean, so here's the thing with
Ferrari, right?
With Eddie Jordan. I mean, let's not forget, this was the guy that got the scoop that Lewis was going to Mercedes.
That's what
he
I'm
was
saying.
The one.
Yeah.
He was the one that got it. Everyone laughed at him, said, "What are you doing?" And he was like, "Telling you, it's going to happen," and he was right. So Eddie does know what he's talking about. Honestly, 2026, I would be knocking on Lewis's head, going, "What are you still doing here?" Like, if he hasn't got his 8th, I would understand it. But if he has got his 8th, I'd be like, "Mate, off into the distance you go." Like, you've done everything that needs to be done. Just take your retirement and be a Mercedes ambassador for the next 10 years and get paid a ridiculous amount of money to do it, and go off and do your fashion and your the Hamilton Commission, Project 44. Go off and do all that stuff. You don't need to be in F1.
But Baxty, he said already, mate. Don't disrespect him. He said that he's staying until he gets his 8th, hasn't he?
There's got to be a point where he's going to have to go, "I'm not sure this is going to happen." I mean, obviously, I want it to happen, and we were one lap away from it happening. But sorry, I know we're not supposed to bring it up. Abu Dhabi, but
it's chaos, isn't it? It is chaos. Still a sore point, but you know what? Here's hoping he gets his 8th, man. But I personally don't want to see. I don't know, mate. I don't want to see. I won't even go down this tangent too much, but I just don't want to see Lewis hanging around too long, right? Because there are F1 drivers who have done similar things in the past. And sport, this is like one of the most common themes in sports. The old champion that stays around, that outstays his welcome and then starts getting destroyed by some younger, hungrier lions. And we don't want to see that. Michael kind of was similar when Rosberg started to not perfectly analogous, but similar. So Lewis is good for now, but the young, hungry lions. And if he wanted proof positive of that, you can see the way that George is, mate. George is coming to get it. Anyway, let's conclude. We'll wrap on that, sir, before I get to start going down the George Russell Alice in Wonderland tunnel. Mate, you've been a legend again. I enjoy these conversations so much. Shout out to Shez. Eid Mubarak by the time this gets published on YouTube and on Spotify and Apple iTunes. Once again, for the avoidance of doubt, do me a favour. If you are listening on a podcasting platform, scroll all the way up to the top on Spotify and leave us a cheeky 5-star review. Por favor, because if you don't do that, this podcast will burn to the embers, and I don't want that. You don't want that. Ringo here definitely doesn't want that. For Baxty, check out Baxty at BaxtyB on Twitter, BaxtyBF1 on YouTube. Go and give that guy a like and the channel a subscribe. Not too much better content on all of the interwebs than that. If you're watching this on YouTube, Cameron F1, subscribe to me, like, comment as always. We will see you same time next week as always. Between now and then, do yourselves a favour. Remember to look but never stare.